In this video and the subsequent videos, we are going to talk about market structures and the characteristics of each kind of market. Now, before you try to understand what I'm talking about, let's start with a very simple example. Now, look at this. So what are these? Of course, they are mangoes. So what I did was I picked up mangoes from 4 different stores or 4 different locations and I tried to put them here. So as you can see, the first picture was taken at QFC, the second was taken at Safeway, the third one was at Walmart, and the last one was at a local farmer's market. Now let me ask you this. Do you notice any significant or remarkable difference between them? What I mean to say is, can you say something like the mangoes from QFC have a higher nutrition content as compared to the mangoes from Walmart? Not really. And even if a very health conscious person may feel some difference, it's not universally accepted. In other words, QFC cannot charge a higher price on mangoes by claiming that their mangoes are healthier as compared to the other locations, right? Well, they might charge a slightly higher price for their mangoes, but that's not because of the product. It's rather because of the services they offer, like better ambience, better customer care, etc. So when I talk about just mangoes, they are all the same. In other words, I can say that this is a homogeneous product. Another important characteristic of such kind of a market is there are a large number of sellers. Now consider a market where the seller sells something like a fruit basket. Mostly in such markets, you'll find many sellers, and each seller sells the good at a common price. In fact, there are so many sellers that a single seller cannot afford to set his own price for the product, because if he does so, he'll lose out all of his customers. So technically, we can say that the sellers operating in such markets are price takers, wherein this price is nothing but the equilibrium price that is set by the market based on the supply and demand. We talked a lot about equilibrium price, demand and supply, changes in demand, changes in supply in our earlier video. Also, in such markets, each seller is a very small player in the market with an insignificant market share. So, a single seller cannot impact the demand and supply in the market. In addition to that, it's very easy for new entrants to enter such market because they do not require huge capital investments. So we can say that there are no barriers to entry. For example, today if I'm selling fruits, tomorrow I can sell vegetables, and day after I can sell something like groceries. I do not need huge capital investments to change the product that I'm selling. Lastly, there is free flow of information in such markets. For example, if a wheat farmer wants to know the current price of wheat, he can easily get it by logging on to the internet. So all of these characteristics that we discussed till now are the characteristics of a perfectly competitive market, which is an extreme case of a market structure. So we discussed the first kind of a market structure, which is perfectly competitive market. So to summarize, these are some of the characteristics that we talked about. In perfect competition, products are homogeneous in nature. There are no barriers to entry. There are too many sellers in the market. The firms are price takers, and this price is set by the market based on the demand and the supply. And lastly, there is free flow of information in such markets. Now let's see what happens to the economic profits in a perfectly competitive market. So let me come back to the graph again. This is the quantity, this is the price, the supply curve, the demand curve, and this is the initial point of equilibrium. This is my equilibrium quantity, and this is the equilibrium price. Now this price PM is the price that is set by the market based on the demand and supply. And in perfect competition, a seller has to sell his product at PM because the firm is a price taker. Now let's see what happens at the firm level. So on the x-axis, let me put quantity. On the y-axis, I have price or the marginal cost. This is my marginal cost curve. This is my average total cost curve. We already discussed earlier in one of my previous videos that the firm would continue to produce till the marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. And in case of perfect competition, price is equal to marginal revenue, right? So my marginal revenue is nothing but the price. So let me try to find a point of intersection between price and the marginal cost to get the optimal quantity of production for the firm. Now you know that the firm has to sell at a price PM because the firm is a price taker. So let me take this price PM over here and try to find a point of intersection between this price and my marginal cost curve. So I find the point of intersection here. I try to mark this point. So this is my Q optimal, which means that the firm would be producing at this level, because at this level the price is exactly equal to the marginal costs. Now before I go further, I have a question for you. What will happen if I manufacture or produce beyond the optimal point of production? Supposing my optimal point of production is 10 units. So the question is, what will happen if I manufacture 11 units instead of 10 units? For the 11th unit that I'm producing, my marginal cost will be higher than the marginal revenue, right? Remember, the marginal cost curve is a U-shaped curve. So after a certain point, my marginal cost keeps increasing, okay? Suppose the marginal revenue that I generate by producing the additional 11th unit is around $10, but my marginal cost is $12. So you can see that the marginal cost is higher than the marginal revenue in this case. So in such kind of a situation, what is the motivation for me to produce the additional 11th unit? Because in any case, the cost is going to be higher than the revenue that I generate. So it's not advisable for me to manufacture beyond the optimal point of production. Okay. So now what is the profit in this case? So you can see that the price is higher than the average total cost. So the difference between price and the average total cost will give me profit per unit. So the blue line that you can see here indicates profit per unit, which is nothing but price minus average total cost. And if I multiply this by the quantity produced, in this case, my quantity produced is the optimal quantity. So let me multiply this by the optimal quantity. That gives me the total economic profits. So in other words, the area of this rectangle that you see here gives me the total economic profits. Now, this is a short run profit. What happens in the long run? In the long run, because there are profits in this industry, it attracts new entrants. Remember, there are no barriers to entry. So once new entrants come, this slowly reduces the price because now there is more supply in the market, but the demand has not changed. As a result, the profits slowly get eroded till it becomes zero, where the firm is set to break even. However, since the firm is still able to cover some of the fixed costs, the firm will continue to produce in the short run until the market equilibrium price touches the average variable cost curve. At this point, the firm immediately shuts down. I have discussed this in greater length in my earlier video, so please go back to the link provided to check my earlier video on shutdown and break-even analysis for perfectly competitive markets. These are some of the other topics which are part of this section, but I have already covered all of them in detail in my earlier videos, so I do not want to again go back and repeat all of this. So I request you to go back to these videos and try to get a better understanding of these topics. I have also provided these links at the bottom of the video, so please go back and check. Now let's do a small concept check before we end this session. Why are the cost curves U-shaped? This is because of the law of diminishing marginal returns. We talked a lot about diminishing marginal returns in one of my earlier videos. What does this mean? This means that as and when I increase the input by 1 unit, the returns that I generate from this additional input decreases after a certain limit. For example, I had discussed the case of a restaurant in my earlier video. Suppose I own a restaurant and I have enough fixed capacity to accommodate 20 customers. And for this capacity, suppose I need say around 5 waiters. Now, as long as I have 5 waiters in my restaurant and I'm operating under full capacity, which means suppose I'm serving around 20 customers, my revenues are at the maximum level. But if I hire one additional waiter, I do not have enough customers to generate additional revenues because I was already operating under full capacity. So the additional waiter that I hired is adding cost to my business with no additional revenue. As a result, my return decreases. Also, firms tend to become less productive after a certain point. This is because beyond the optimal point, they are exposed to diseconomies of scale. We also talked about diseconomies of scale in the earlier video. So, overall, hiring additional labor or in general, increasing inputs beyond the most optimal point adds costs to the business. As a result, the cost curves are U-shaped.